This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. A couple of pieces of Browns news that has dropped over the last few hours has been, one, Jed Wills has restructured his contract, and Greg Newsome is on the trading block reportedly for the Cleveland Browns. And also the Browns are really interested in getting Christian Wilkins. Now, a lot of this stuff has smoke to it. I don't think it's nothing, but let's talk about them individually, and then we'll talk about how this all kind of comes together and makes sense at the end. But we'll start with Jed Wills' restructure. Now, this was, I think, a more impactful bit of news than I think a lot of people understand is this restructure. Because there were some restructures that were no-brainers for the Cleveland Browns, right? I thought the restructure of Deshaun Watson, that's going to be a no-brainer whenever they get that done. And I had Jack Duffin on, and he made a good point of that the Browns aren't going to clear all that money up at one time because it hurts their leverage ability when it comes to agents about what cap space they have versus what they don't. So they'll try to do these things, and stagger them when they need to or when they have to. So I don't think that what you see right now as their cap space is what they're going to roll into free agency trying to spend, or at least is mirrored to their budget. But they restructured Jed Wills, which on the surface makes sense. As the article says, written by Corey Kinnan, it clears $10.44 million in cap space for the Cleveland Browns. And basically the way that the Browns are going to deal with this money, because you still got to pay for Jed Wills' contract in the salary cap. I think Jack Duffin has a great illustration of that on one of his articles where he wrote about this, Jed Wills restructure. But basically the Browns would pay like $2 million in dead cap for like the next few years to kind of get rid of Jed's contract and get rid of what it looks like. Yeah. So this is kind of what I was talking about here, where the restructure contract, it brings the money down about $10 million, and then you basically pay $2.6 million till 2028. And remember, the salary cap goes up about 8%. So this number, which is already a small number, will be even smaller by the time you get to 2028 when it comes to percentage of the salary cap. So yeah, that's how the Browns are willing to deal with this. Again, this is just more or less the Browns doing things to free up some space as this ad pops up. But this is the Browns doing things to free up some space for this year and next year. And this is something that will free up some space for this year. And the reason I think this is an important bit of news is because Jed Wills is somebody we've talked about potentially being traded, right? Maybe the Browns want to move DeWan to left tackle. They want to have Jack Conklin at right tackle. And maybe Jed Wills is expendable. Well, we know that Jed Wills is no longer expendable now that he has done this restructure, because once you restructure a player, it's very difficult to trade that player, and it's not worth it for the team to trade that player. So we know that trading Jed Wills likely off the books or off the table here for the Cleveland Browns. Now, what the future is for Jed Wills, I don't know. I have no idea, right? He could be cheap. They might bring him back next year. They might decide to move on. It depends on what happens in the draft, what happens with other free agents, and what happens with Jed Wills and his performance over this next year to really determine where we are. But we know that Jed Wills will be playing for the Cleveland Browns, more than likely starting for the Cleveland Browns at a tackle position. Now, again, they might decide to do what Jake Burns has come on here and suggested, where maybe you move DeWan to left tackle and you move Jed Wills to right tackle and see if Jed can be a better player, a more effective player at that right tackle position, because he's left-handed and he naturally has been a right tackle his whole career. His whole career before playing for the Cleveland Browns. So maybe that might be where they do what they do with Jed Wills, but we know Jed Wills is going to be a part of that equation. We know that Jack Conklin's deal, as far as freeing up cap space for this year, there's not really any way you can do that with Jack Conklin's deal. So you know he's here and DeJuan Jones is here. So the Browns are going to go into the 2024 season almost guaranteed with those three guys on the roster. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. It's going to be interesting to see if they're interested in adding another name to that rotation in the draft just to be comfortable with it, because as much as those three guys give you security for this year, you know that Jack could be gone next year, more than likely to be gone. You know that Jed can be gone next year, and you know the only guy you're going to have is really DeJuan Jones. So you might want to reload on tackle, because while you have three right now, after this season, you'll be back down to one. And the one is coming off a rookie year, so you don't know if he's going to be as good as he was his rookie year for his whole career yet, even though we all kind of expect DeJuan to keep up that high level of play. So that is the Jed Wills news. Now, semi-connected to this is the news, and it's not really news. We've been talking about trading Greg Newsome for a while, but, you know, the idea that the Browns trading Greg Newsome. It has been offered by Jason Lockenfor, which, again, we're going to highlight this name because not really the most trustworthy name when it comes to national people talking about the Cleveland Browns. Does not have the best track record. He did have a decent track record when Joe Banner was the GM with the Cleveland Browns. But since Joe Banner has left, his connections with the organization don't seem to be super accurate. He's been wrong about a few things recently with the Cleveland Browns. So it's worth noting that this is who's reporting it. But the reason I think this is a little bit more credible is because his source isn't somebody who is affiliated with the Browns. That's been proven to be unreliable. His source is other GMs, and he probably does have relationships with other GMs who are saying that, hey, Greg Newsome can be had if you want him. And I think the way that we talk about players on the trade block is that once you put them on the trade block, you must trade them. That's not how Andrew Berry sees this at all. I think the Browns are in this position with Greg Newsome. They're in one of two minds. If somebody gives us a good offer for Greg Newsome, I think the Browns would be likely to move off of Greg Newsome if it was a worthwhile offer. Now, none of the offers, and the offer that's suggested in this article, which is like a 4th round pick, a 3rd round and a 4th round pick for Greg Newsome, not really worth it for the Cleveland Browns. I don't think they would be likely to do something like that unless option 2 comes into play. But we'll talk about option 2 in just a second, because it's kind of related to the third thing we're going to talk about, right? And it's kind of related to the first thing we're talking about as well. But the Browns are in the position to where they have to make decisions about football personnel on the basis of who makes them better. What does this make them better this year? They are not playing for next year. They're not playing for the next couple of years. They have stuck their flag in the ground for this year and next year. So trading Greg Newsome for draft picks doesn't make sense. I know they say in the article that the Browns would want to free up some cap space. Well, we'll talk about when that would become a possibility. But even then, I think it would be a added benefit that they could free up some cap space, but I don't think they're in a situation where they need to free up cap space in order to get Greg Newsome. Well, and they have to move Greg Newsome. Now, so you look at all of these pieces, right? The Jed Wills restructure, the smoke coming from the Christian Wilkins side of this, right? And then you hear that the Browns are open to moving Greg Newsome. Now, again, I think I said this earlier in the video. I'll say it again. I don't think the Browns are in a situation where they feel like they have to trade Greg Newsome right now, right? They feel like Greg has a solid role on this team, right? He's the slot corner. He's also somebody who they can move inside and outside if need be. He allows them some flexibility at that corner position. And he's also insurance for Denzel Ward, who I think the injury part of his, like the actual physical injury part of his reputation's a bit overblown. He doesn't have pulled muscles all the time or something like that. But the concussion history is a concern. He's had a ton of concussions. Almost every year he has a concussion, and you wonder like how many of these can he have before he has to retire. So you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you thought you had Denzel Ward, he retires or something like that, or has to go out for a season because of a concussion, and then you have to live with Cam Mitchell being your other corner opposite of Martin Emerson, and you're a much worse team. If you have Greg Newsome, that does provide you a level of security that most teams don't have. So I don't think they're just going to get rid of him for a mid-round draft pick or something like that. I think they see his value to the team being more important. I think the area where they could decide they want to move on is if like a Christian Wilkins becomes available. If they can get Christian Wilkins to sign here for like $20 to $22 million. And if they want to maintain the flexibility that they have over the last few years, they can do something like trade Greg Newsome on top of other things to kind of free up that money. So they have to, their answer to the question, does this make the Browns better? Not necessarily the draft pick compensation for Greg Newsome, but if this allows us to maintain flexibility and bring in Christian Wilkins, they might feel like that makes them a better football team. We'll see what they do going forward. They don't have to do it. They can bring in Christian Wilkins and not trade Greg Newsome. They would be in a worse cap situation over the next couple of years, but they could technically do it. So I do think if you find out on Monday that the Browns are about to sign Christian Wilkins or Chris Jones or something like that, then yeah, Greg Newsome, the shoe's about to drop on the Greg Newsome trade pretty soon there too, right? Like I think they'll make a move, maybe pick up a late round pick, but it's more about the cap space that they'd be clearing up and the flexibility that they would get. Those two moves would be kind of connected despite not being a part of the same transaction. So I do think that's a possibility. As far as trading Greg Newsome goes, again, you got to answer this question. Does it make the team better, right? Does trading Greg Newsome make the team better, or does it just get rid of a player? Because so often when we get wrapped up into trading a player, we just want to find a trade that works, so much so that we kind of forget whether that trade's actually making you better. It's just getting lost in the sauce, right? We do this a lot with the draft. We do this a lot with trade transactions where we just work so hard to find a trade that makes sense. We don't stop and ask ourselves, well, does this actually make us better? And that's the question that they need to ask, and they need to answer that with a yes with how they do this. And I think the only thing that would make sense to me is if you traded Greg Newsome because you wanted to bring in Christian Wilkins or somebody like that, where you'd be willing to live with possibly being low on corners because you're going to be so strong in the interior and that defensive line in general, where it's not going to matter as much who your corners are. So I think that's the situation that the Browns are in. We'll see what they do. It's going to be an interesting couple of days here as the weekend passes and the free agency tampering period starts. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.